Millionaire rancher hired a girl mocked by town warriors guarded his gate for days after. Before names, before blame, there was only one question: to keep going or surrender. This is No Limit Stories. If you feel this story is yours, stay and make it your own. The Wild Girl. The September wind of 1884 whipped through Fort Laramie, Wyoming territory, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of an early winter. Along the wooden sidewalks of the frontier town, merchants hawked their wares while soldiers from the nearby fort mingled with cowboys, traders, and the occasional traveler heading west on the Oregon Trail. Through this daily chaos moved a solitary figure that never failed to draw stares and whispers. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20, with sun-darkened skin and black hair woven into a single braid that hung to her waist. Her dress was a patchwork of different fabrics, each piece carefully mended with tiny, perfect stitches. But it was her boots that drew the most attention. Hand-sewn from soft deer hide, decorated with geometric patterns that no white cobbler would recognize. "There goes the wild girl," Mrs. Adelaide Thornton announced to her sewing circle, loud enough for the girl to hear as she passed. Sweeping porches for pennies. You'd think she'd have learned proper English by now. The girl kept her eyes down, carrying 2 heavy water buckets from the well to the Frontier Inn. Not a drop spilled despite the weight, her movements fluid and practiced. She'd been doing this for 3 years now, ever since she'd wandered into Fort Laramie alone, speaking a mixture of broken English and what the educated folks recognized as Cheyenne. "I heard she was raised by Indians," whispered young Mrs. Garrett. "Found abandoned as a baby and brought up heathen. Can you imagine? Explains why no Christian household will employ her properly," Mrs. Thornton sniffed. "Though I must say, she works hard enough. Saw her fixing the hotel's fence yesterday with nothing but her bare hands and some rawhide." At the Frontier Inn, the girl set down her buckets carefully. Mr. Josiah Creech, the proprietor, emerged from the back door, his perpetual frown deepening. "You're late," he lied, though the sun's position clearly showed she was early. "And look at those fingernails coal dust again. How many times I got to tell you to keep yourself presentable?" The girl's fingers were indeed stained from helping the blacksmith's boy fix a wagon wheel that morning before her shift. Though she received no pay for it, she tucked her hands into her apron and nodded silently. "Porch needs sweeping," Creech continued, "and mind you stay away from the guests. Had another complaint about you making folks uncomfortable." There had been no complaint, but the girl had learned that defending herself only made things worse. She took the broom and began her work, each stroke deliberate and thorough. From across the street, a man watched her work. Silas Granger sat on a bench outside the general store, his silver-headed cane resting against his knee. At 52, he was one of the wealthiest men in Wyoming territory, his ranch sprawling across 20,000 acres of prime grazing land. His fortune had come from cattle, smart investments, and an uncanny ability to judge both horses and people. He'd been watching the girl they called Wild for the past week, ever since he'd come to town to arrange the sale of 500 head of cattle to the army. What he'd seen intrigued him. Yesterday, he'd watched her calm a spooked horse that 3 grown men couldn't handle, whispering something in a language he didn't recognize until the animal stood quiet as a lamb. The day before, she'd repaired a broken gate at the livery stable using nothing but leather strips and ingenuity, creating a fix stronger than the original. But it was what he'd witnessed that morning that made up his mind. He'd been leaving the bank when he saw her kneeling in an alley, sharing her meager breakfast, a single piece of bread, with a starving dog. The animal, skeletal and suspicious, had crept forward at her gentle coaxing. She'd torn the bread in half, giving the larger piece to the creature without hesitation. "You're wasting your time watching that one, Granger." Silas looked up to find Judge William Harrington standing beside him, thumbs hooked in his vest. "Is that so?" Silas replied mildly. "The wild girl? She's trouble waiting to happen. Doesn't speak properly, doesn't know her place. Some say she's cursed. She brings bad luck to anyone who helps her. Funny thing about curses," Silas mused. They usually say more about the people spreading them than the person they're aimed at." The judge snorted. "You always were too soft-hearted for your own good. Just remember I warned you." As Harrington walked away, Silas returned his attention to the girl. She'd finished sweeping and was now hauling more water, this time for the bathhouse. Despite the hard labor and constant derision, she moved with a dignity that reminded him of his late wife Eleanor had possessed that same quiet strength, that refusal to be broken by circumstance. He'd built his fortune by seeing value where others saw worthlessness. In horses dismissed as untrainable, in land deemed too dry for cattle, in opportunities others were too frightened to grasp. Now, watching this young woman work with such grace despite her circumstances, he saw something everyone else missed. That afternoon, Silas made his decision. He waited until the girl had finished her work at the hotel and was heading to her next job at the laundry. She walked with her head down, avoiding eye contact with the townspeople, who stepped aside as if she carried disease. "Miss," he called out. She stopped, turning slowly. Up close, he could see her eyes were the color of dark honey, intelligent and wary. There was indeed coal dust under her fingernails, but her hands were steady and strong. "My name is Silas Granger," he said, removing his hat. "I own the Double G Ranch north of town." She nodded slightly, waiting. He noticed she positioned herself with clear access to the street, ready to flee if necessary. How many times had she needed that escape route? "I'm in need of someone to help manage my household," he continued. "The work's hard but honest. Full wages, $30 a month plus room and board. Are you interested?" For the first time since he'd been watching her, he saw genuine surprise cross her features. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. I do not speak well," she finally said, her accent thick but her words carefully chosen. "People say I bring a curse. People say a lot of things," Silas replied. "I prefer to judge for myself. Can you work hard? Yes. Can you be trusted? Yes. Then that's all I need to know. Can you start tomorrow?" She stared at him as if he might be playing some cruel joke. Around them, townsfolk had stopped to gawk at the sight of the richest rancher in the territory talking to the wild girl like she was a real person. You are sure?" she asked quietly. "I am not like others." "I am. You're someone who needs honest work, and I need an honest worker," Silas interrupted gently. "Nothing more complicated than that." Tears gathered in her eyes, quickly blinked away. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly for the first time. "Then yes, I start tomorrow." "Good. Be at the ranch by sunrise. Ask anyone for directions to the Double G, they'll point you right." He placed his hat back on his head. "One more thing. What should I call you?" She hesitated, then spoke so softly he had to lean in to hear. "My name is Sarah Birdson. Pleased to meet you, Miss Birdson. I'll see you tomorrow." As Silas walked away, he could feel the eyes of the town upon him. By evening, everyone would know that Silas Granger had lost his mind and hired the wild girl. They'd shake their heads, predict disaster, and warn him he'd rue the day. Let them talk, he thought. They'd been wrong about him before when he'd bought the worthless land that became his fortune, when he'd married Eleanor despite her lack of pedigree, and when he'd trusted his instincts over popular opinion. Something told him they were wrong about Sarah Birdson too, and if his instincts were right, hiring her would prove to be one of the best decisions he'd ever made. He just had no idea how profoundly true that would prove to be. The watchers on the ridge, Sarah Birdson arrived at the Double G Ranch as the first pink light touched the eastern sky. She'd walked the 8 miles from town in the dark, her soft boots making no sound on the dirt road. In her hands, she carried a small bundle, everything she owned in the world. The ranch sprawled before her, like something from a dream. The main house stood 2 stories tall, built from timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it lay barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and outbuildings, all maintained with obvious care. Smoke already rose from several chimneys, and she could hear the low murmur of cowboys preparing for the day's work. "You must be Miss Birdson." Sarah startled, not having heard anyone approach. A woman stood on the porch, perhaps 60 years old, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and kind eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Mrs. Chun," the woman continued, descending the steps. "Mr. Granger told me to expect you. I manage the household." Sarah had heard of Mrs. Chun, a Chinese widow who'd worked for Granger for 15 years, earning respect through sheer competence despite the prejudice she faced. If anyone would understand what it was like to be an outsider, it would be her. "I work hard," Sarah said simply. "I'm sure you do." Mrs. Chun studied her with those sharp eyes. "Come, I'll show you to your room, then we'll see about breakfast. The men will be hungry soon." The room was small but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and luxury of luxuries, a window that looked out over the valley. Sarah set down her bundle carefully, overwhelmed by the space. In town, she'd slept in a lean-to behind the laundry, grateful for even that shelter. This is mine," she asked. "Yours as long as you work here," Mrs. Chun confirmed. "Mr. Granger runs an honest house. Work hard, cause no trouble, and you'll be treated fairly. That goes for everyone here, white, Chinese, Mexican, or otherwise." As Sarah followed Mrs. Chun to the kitchen, she began to understand why Silas Granger had succeeded where others had failed. He judged people by their worth, not their birth. It was a radical concept in 1884 Wyoming. The kitchen was already warm, with coffee brewing and bread rising. Mrs. Chun showed Sarah the routine, how Granger liked his eggs, when the ranch hands ate, and where everything was stored. Sarah absorbed it all, her quick mind cataloging every detail. "Can you read?" Mrs. Chun asked as they worked. "Some. I learn more." "Good, Mr. Granger has books. He'll let you borrow them if you ask." They were setting out breakfast in the dining room when Silas Granger appeared, dressed for a day's work, but moving carefully. Sarah noticed he favored his left leg, an old injury perhaps. "Morning, Miss Birdson. Mrs. Chun treating you well?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you." He sat at the head of the table, and Sarah poured his coffee without being asked. She'd noticed yesterday that he took it black and remembered. "After breakfast, I'll need help in the study," he said. "Papers to organize. Can you handle that?" "I try, sir." That's all anyone can do. The morning passed quickly. Sarah proved herself adept at every task, serving breakfast to the ranch hands without dropping a plate, organizing papers though her reading was slow, and even helping Mrs. Chun with complex calculations for the household accounts. "You've got a head for numbers," Mrs. Chun observed. "Where'd you learn?" Sarah hesitated, then answered carefully. "The people, the Cheyenne, they teach differently. See patterns in all things." It was the most she'd said about her past, and Mrs. Chun didn't push. Everyone at the Double G had their secrets. That first day set the pattern. Sarah worked from dawn to dusk, taking on any task asked of her. She helped in the kitchen, tended the vegetable garden, mended clothes with those tiny, perfect stitches, and even assisted the foreman with the horses when they discovered her uncanny ability to calm even the most skittish animals. The ranch hands, initially suspicious, soon accepted her. Unlike the townspeople, they judged her by her work, and her work was exceptional. Even crusty old Jake, the senior cowboy who'd been with Granger for 20 years, admitted she was right handy to have around. It was the second night when everything changed. Sarah had just finished helping Mrs. Chun clean up after supper when one of the cowboys burst through the kitchen door. "Boss needs to see you," he said to Sarah, his face pale. Something strange is happening." She found Silas Granger on the front porch, along with his foreman, Tom Bradley, and several armed cowboys. They were all staring at the ridgeline to the north. "Miss Birdson," Granger said quietly, "I think you'd better have a look at this." Sarah followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. Along the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light, stood a line of riders. Even at this distance, she could see the feathers in their hair, the lances held upright, and the patient stillness of warriors. "Apache?" Tom Bradley asked nervously. "This far north?" "No," Sarah whispered. "Cheyenne. You know them?" Granger asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah studied the figures, noting the way they sat their horses and the specific arrangement of their formation. Her heart began to race. "Dog soldiers," she said softly. "Elite warriors. They do not come without purpose. Are we in danger?" Bradley demanded, his hand moving to his pistol. Sarah shook her head slowly. "If they meant harm, you would not see them. They watch. They guard." "Guard what?" But Sarah couldn't answer because she didn't understand it herself. The dog soldiers were the most feared warriors among the Cheyenne, men who had taken sacred vows and lived apart from the tribe. For them to appear like this, to show themselves so openly. "Everyone stay calm," Granger ordered. "No one shoots unless they attack. Miss Birdson, can you?" He was interrupted by movement on the ridge. One rider had separated from the others, moving down the slope at an easy walk. As he drew closer, Sarah gasped. She knew that face, though years had passed. Standing Elk, one of the most respected dog soldiers, a man who'd been like an uncle to her in her childhood among the Cheyenne. "I need to go to him," she said. "Absolutely not," Bradley protested. "It could be a trap." "Let her go," Granger said quietly. "But we'll be watching." Sarah walked out beyond the ranch gates, her heart pounding. Standing Elk dismounted when she was 20 feet away, his weathered face showing no emotion. "Little singing bird," he said in Cheyenne. "We heard you had found a place among the whites." "Uncle," she replied in the same language, her voice thick with emotion. "Why are you here?" "The man who owns this land. He showed you respect when all others showed contempt. This is known to us. The spirits say he has a good heart, but enemies gather like wolves. We come to honor the debt." "What debt?" "He owes the people nothing." Standing Elk's rare smile appeared. "Not his debt, yours. You saved my grandson 3 winters ago, when the blue coats would have killed him. You hid him, fed him, and sent him back to us. Did you think we would forget?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She had saved the boy, risking everything to protect a wounded child. She'd never expected acknowledgement, let alone this. "The warriors will watch," Standing Elk continued, "day and night, until we are certain the danger has passed. The man with the good heart, Granger, he is under our protection now. As are you, little singing bird. There is no danger here. There is always danger for those who stand between worlds," Standing Elk interrupted. "You will know soon enough." He mounted his horse and rode back to the ridge without another word. Sarah stood there long after he'd rejoined the other warriors, trying to process what had just happened. When she finally returned to the porch, everyone was staring at her with a mixture of awe and fear. "Well," Granger asked, "They will watch," she said haltingly, searching for the English words. "They say you have a good heart. They protect." "Protect from what?" Sarah met his eyes. "I do not know, but dog soldiers do not come without reason. Something comes." That night, Sarah barely slept. From her window, she could see the fires on the ridge where the warriors kept their vigil. Mrs. Chun brought her tea, sitting on the edge of her bed in a surprising gesture of comfort. "You saved one of their children," the older woman said. "It wasn't a question. He was hurt. Just a boy. I could not let him die. And now they protect the man who protected you." Mrs. Chun smiled sadly. "The world is strange, child. Sometimes the kindness we show returns in ways we never expect." "Mr. Granger will send me away now," Sarah said quietly. "Indians at his ranch town will talk." "Let me tell you something about Silas Granger," Mrs. Chun said. 15 years ago, when no one would hire a Chinese widow, he gave me work. When they burned crosses on his lawn, he stood guard all night with a shotgun. When they threatened his business, he told them to go to hell. He doesn't bend to the town's hatred, but this is different. Dog soldiers are protecting his ranch, for free, apparently. Mrs. Chun patted her hand. "Sleep, child. Tomorrow will bring what it brings," but sleep wouldn't come. Sarah stood at her window, watching the fires on the ridge, wondering what Standing Elk had meant about danger coming. The dog soldiers didn't act on whims, they knew something. In his own room, Silas Granger was also awake, though for different reasons. He'd built his fortune by taking calculated risks, by seeing opportunities where others saw only danger. Having Cheyenne warriors guarding his ranch was certainly not something he'd planned for, but as he considered it, he realized he wasn't afraid. Intrigued, yes. Concerned about the town's reaction, certainly. But not afraid, because in his gut, he knew that Sarah Birdson had brought something to his ranch that money couldn't buy: a bridge between worlds that were usually at war. He thought about his late wife, Eleanor, and how she would have loved this strange turn of events. She'd always said his greatest gift was seeing the gold in people others discarded. "Well, Ellie," he murmured to the darkness, "looks like I've done it again. Though I'll admit, this time I might have bitten off more than I can chew." Outside, the warriors maintained their vigil. The night wind carried the sound of their soft chanting, a prayer for protection that hadn't been heard in this valley for decades. And somewhere between the ranch house and the ridge, between the world of the whites and the world of the Cheyenne, Sarah Birdson stood as the bridge, fragile, uncertain, but holding nonetheless. The watchers had come. Soon enough, everyone would understand why. The town's fury. By the fourth day of the warriors' vigil, Fort Laramie was in an uproar. The presence of armed Cheyenne so close to town had transformed curiosity into fear, fear into anger, and anger into action. It started with a delegation. Sarah was feeding the chickens when she saw the cloud of dust on the road. Too many riders to be casual visitors. She quickly finished scattering the grain and hurried to find Mr. Granger. She found him in his study, going over accounts with Mrs. Chun. "Riders coming," she said simply. "Many." Granger looked up from his ledgers, noting the tension in her voice. "How many?" 15, maybe 20. He rose, reaching for the gun belt hanging on a peg by the door. "Mrs. Chun, have the hand stay close to the house." "Sarah, you'd better." "I stay," she interrupted. "This is because of me." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but stay behind me." They met the delegation in front of the house. Judge Harrington led them, flanked by Mayor Thompson, several members of the town council, and a dozen armed men, including the sheriff. Their faces ranged from worried to openly hostile. "Silas," the judge began without preamble, "we need to talk about your Indian problem." "I wasn't aware I had one," Granger replied calmly. "Don't play dumb," Mayor Thompson snapped. "The whole territory knows you've got Cheyenne warriors camped on your ridge. Armed hostiles, Silas, within striking distance of the town. They're on my land, and they haven't bothered anyone. Yet," Sheriff Watson added. "Look, Granger, I respect you, but this is a powder keg waiting to explode. People are scared. They remember the raids from 10 years ago." "These aren't raiders," Sarah said quietly from behind Granger. Every eye turned to her, and she saw the disgust on several faces. "You," Judge Harrington pointed a thick finger at her. "You're the cause of all this. Should have run you out of town years ago." "That's enough," Granger's voice carried the steel that had built his empire. "Miss Birdson is my employee and under my protection. You'll speak to her with respect or not at all." "Respect?" One of the councilmen laughed bitterly. "For a squaw who brings savages to our doorstep?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even some of the delegation looked uncomfortable at the slur. Granger's hand moved closer to his gun. "I'll ask you to leave now," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We're not going anywhere until you send those Indians away," the mayor insisted. "The town council met this morning. Either they go, or we'll make them go." "Is that a threat?" Judge Harrington tried to play peacemaker. "Silas, be reasonable. You're one man. We represent the entire town. Send the girl away. The Indians will follow, and we can all get back to normal." "Normal," Granger repeated. "You mean back to when you could mock and abuse a young woman for the crime of being different? When you could pay her pennies for work worth dollars? That normal? You're choosing a wild girl over your own people?" Sheriff Watson asked, genuine bewilderment in his voice. "I'm choosing decency over mob rule," Granger replied. "Now get off my land. All of you." The delegation milled uncertainly. They'd expected Granger to be reasonable, to bow to pressure as others had before. They hadn't expected defiance. "You're making a mistake, Silas," Judge Harrington warned. "A terrible mistake. Wouldn't be my first. Won't be my last." As the delegation rode away, Sarah touched Granger's arm. "You should not have done this. I will go. The warriors will follow." "You'll do no such thing," he interrupted. "I hired you to do a job and you're doing it well. I don't fire good employees because the town throws a tantrum." That evening, as they all sat down to supper, the mood was somber. The ranch hands ate quietly, aware that their boss had just made powerful enemies. Even Mrs. Chun seemed subdued. "What happened today?" Granger finally said, addressing the room. "Anyone who's uncomfortable with it is free to leave. I'll pay fair severance, no hard feelings." Old Jake spoke up first. "Been with you 20 years, boss. I'm not leaving now." "Those Cheyenne haven't bothered us none," another hand added. "And Miss Sarah here, she's been nothing but helpful." One by one, the men voiced their support. Not all were comfortable with the situation, but loyalty to Granger ran deep. He'd stood by them through droughts and blizzards, had paid for doctors when they were sick, and had treated them like men rather than hired help. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She'd never experienced this people standing up for her, choosing her side despite the cost. That night, the situation escalated. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke. From her window, she could see flames licking at the barn. She ran barefoot through the house, shouting the alarm. Within minutes, everyone was fighting the fire, forming bucket brigades, and trying to save the horses. On the ridge, the warriors sat on their horses, watching but not interfering. Sarah knew they must be struggling with a decision. Their instinct would be to help, but showing themselves would only make things worse. It took 2 hours to control the blaze. The barn was damaged but standing, the horses saved. As dawn broke, they surveyed the damage and found the message painted on the side of the house. "Indian lovers burn. Cowards," Jake spat, "sneaking around in the dark like thieves." Granger stood staring at the message, his face carved from stone. Sarah approached hesitantly. "This is my fault. This is their fault," he cut her off. "Their hatred, their choice." He turned to Tom Bradley. "Double the night watch. Anyone who comes on this property uninvited gets one warning, then we shoot. Boss, if we start shooting townspeople, then maybe they'll learn to respect property lines." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Father Miguel, the Catholic priest who ministered to the Mexican families around Fort Laramie, rode up alone. Unlike the delegation, he came in peace. "Mr. Granger," he said, removing his hat. "I wondered if I might have a word." They sat on the porch, Sarah serving coffee before Granger insisted she join them. "I've heard much about you, Miss Birdson," the priest said kindly. "The Mexican families speak well of your kindness." Sarah flushed. She had helped several families when she could, sharing what little she had. "Father, if you've come to convince me to send her away," Granger began. "On the contrary, I've come to offer support." The priest sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "I've been in Fort Laramie for 5 years. In that time, I've seen how the town treats those they consider outsiders. The Chinese, the Mexicans, and the few natives who try to trade peacefully. It shames me as a Christian." "Pretty words, Father, but what can you do?" "More than you might think. Many of my parishioners work in town, in the homes and businesses of those who threatened you. They hear things, see things, and they remember who treats them with kindness." He looked at Sarah. "You helped the Vasquez family when their baby was sick. Maria Gonzalez still prays for you daily because you mended her husband's only good shirt for free." "Was nothing," Sarah murmured. "To you, perhaps. To them, it was everything." Father Miguel stood. "I cannot stop what the town plans, but I can ensure you're warned. And perhaps when the time comes, you'll find you have more allies than you know." After he left, Granger was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Seems you've been building bridges I didn't even know about." "I help when I can," Sarah said simply. "Is what the people taught we are all related." That evening, one of the dog soldiers rode down from the ridge. Not Standing Elk, but a younger warrior Sarah didn't recognize. He stopped at the gate and called out in accented English, "Message for Singing Bird." Sarah went to him, Granger and several hands watching nervously. The warrior spoke quickly in Cheyenne, his words making Sarah's face pale. "What is it?" Granger asked when the warrior rode away. "They say men gather in town. Many men. They come tomorrow night, maybe night after, not just to burn, to kill." "How many?" 40, maybe 50, some from other towns. She met his eyes. "They mean to make an example of you, of me." Granger felt a cold fury settle in his chest. He'd fought in the Civil War and had seen what mobs could do when hatred overcame reason. But he'd thought those days were behind him. "Then we'd better get ready," he said grimly. "No," Sarah said suddenly. "No more blood because of me. I go. I disappear. They leave you alone, Sarah." His use of her first name stopped her. "You think they'll stop with you gone? You think they'll forget I stood against them? This isn't about you anymore. It's about whether a man has the right to hire whom he pleases, help whom he pleases, and live as he pleases. If we give in now, they'll just find another target." "But no buts, you're not running." "We're not running. Whatever comes, we face it together." That night, preparations began in earnest. Weapons were cleaned and loaded. Defensive positions were identified. Mrs. Chun organized medical supplies, her face grim but determined. She'd survived one mob in California. She'd survive another here. On the ridge, more warriors had appeared. Sarah counted at least 30 now, their fires burning bright in the darkness. The town might bring 50 men, but they'd face dog soldiers, warriors who'd fought the U.S. cavalry to a standstill more than once. "It'll be a bloodbath," Tom Bradley said quietly to Granger as they checked ammunition. "Maybe, or maybe something else will happen." "Like what?" Granger looked toward the ridge, then at the house where Sarah was helping Mrs. Chun prepare bandages. "I honestly don't know, Tom, but I've learned that when you stand for what's right, sometimes the world surprises you, and sometimes it kills you." "That too," Granger admitted. "But I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees." As the night deepened and strange calm settled over the Double G Ranch, warriors on the ridge, defenders in the house, and somewhere between them, a young woman who'd become the unlikely center of a conflict that would test the very soul of the frontier. The storm was coming, but for tonight, there was coffee and companionship, the warmth of people who'd chosen to stand together against the darkness. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Sarah stood at her window one last time before bed, looking up at the ridge. In the firelight, she could see the warriors maintaining their vigil, protectors from her past watching over her present. It should have been impossible, this convergence of worlds. But here it was, as real as the stars overhead. "Give us strength," she whispered in Cheyenne, "all of us." The wind carried her words up to the ridge, where ancient ears heard and understood. The vigil continued. The die was cast. In Fort Laramie, people were preparing torches and stoking hatred, ready to explode into violence that would reverberate throughout the territory. When worlds unite, the mob came at dusk on the 7th day. Sarah spotted them first from the kitchen window, a dark line of riders approaching from the south, torches not yet lit but visible in their hands. Her heart hammered as she ran to find Granger. "They're coming." 2 words, but everyone in the house knew what they meant. The ranch hands took their positions, some in the house, others in strategic spots around the compound. Mrs. Chun calmly continued preparing medical supplies, her hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. Granger stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching the approaching riders. Beside him, Tom Bradley counted. 43, maybe 45 men, the foreman reported. "More than we expected. Less than we can handle," old Jake growled, checking his ammunition. But as the mob drew closer, something unexpected happened. From the north, east, and west, other riders appeared. Not the mob's reinforcements, but something else entirely. "Boss!" one of the hands called out, voice shaking. "We've got company." The Cheyenne warriors had left their ridge. All 30 of them, riding slowly but purposefully toward the ranch. Their faces were painted for war, their weapons clearly visible. But that wasn't what made everyone's breath catch. Riding with them were others. Father Miguel led a group of 20 Mexican vaqueros, all armed, their faces set with determination. Behind them came a surprising sight, Mr. Liu, who ran the Chinese laundry in town, accompanied by a dozen Chinese workers carrying everything from rifles to mining tools. What in the hell? Double quotes, Tom Bradley breathed. Sarah understood first. The bridges, she whispered. All the small kindnesses. The mob had pulled up 500 yards from the house, clearly not expecting this development. Judge Harrington rode at their head, Mayor Thompson beside him. Their confident approach had faltered at the sight of the growing opposition. But the surprises weren't over. From the direction of Fort Laramie itself came another group. Sarah gasped as she recognized the lead rider, Colonel James Pritchard, commander of the fort, in full uniform. Behind him rode a squad of cavalry, perhaps 15 men. The colonel stopped his men midway between the mob and the ranch, positioning himself as a barrier. "Gentlemen," his voice carried clearly in the evening air, "I received word of a potential civil disturbance. As the ranking military authority in this region, I'm here to prevent bloodshed." "This is town business, Colonel," Judge Harrington called out. "No concern of the army. Armed mobs threatening tax-paying citizens is very much my concern," Pritchard replied coldly, "as is preventing an Indian war, which is exactly what you're about to start." The Cheyenne warriors had formed a line to the north of the ranch. Father Miguel's vaqueros flanked the west. The Chinese workers, looking nervous but determined, held the east. The mob found itself potentially surrounded. "Now," Colonel Pritchard continued, "I'm going to make this very simple. You men turn around and go home. Anyone who fires a shot will be arrested for insurrection. Anyone who damages property will be prosecuted to the full extent of federal law." "You're taking their side?" Mayor Thompson sputtered. "Indians and Chinese and—" "I'm taking the side of law and order," the colonel interrupted. "Mr. Granger has broken no laws. He's employed who he chooses, which is his right as an American citizen. If you have an issue with that, take it up with Congress, not with torches and guns." Standing Elk chose that moment to ride forward from the warrior line. His painted face was fierce, but his voice was calm when he spoke in clear English. "We came to protect a friend of the people, a man who showed honor when others showed none. But we do not seek war. Send your mob away, and we will return to our lands in peace. Continue this path, and know that every Cheyenne, every Arapaho, and every Lakota will hear of white men who attacked those who showed kindness to our people. Is this the war you want?" The silence stretched taut. Sarah could see the mob wavering, some men already turning their horses. They'd come expecting to overwhelm a single ranch. Instead, they faced trained cavalry, hardened warriors, and armed citizens of multiple races united in common cause. Granger stepped off his porch and walked toward the confrontation, ignoring Tom Bradley's hiss of warning. He stopped beside Colonel Pritchard's horse. "Judge Harrington," he called out, "you came here because I hired a young woman you don't approve of. Because warriors came to protect someone who showed them kindness. You say I'm betraying my race, my people. But look around you." He gestured to the diverse forces arrayed against the mob. "These are my people. Every man and woman who judges others by their character rather than their color. Every person who believes in decency over hatred. Every soul who understands that strength comes from unity, not division." He paused, his voice carrying clearly. "You want to burn my ranch because I won't bow to your prejudice? Then you'll have to go through all of us. White, Chinese, Mexican, Native, all of us standing together. Is your hatred worth dying for?" Sarah moved then, walking past Granger to stand between all the groups. In the fading light, she looked small and vulnerable, but her voice was strong. "I am the one you call Wild Girl. The one you mock and curse, but I have a name, Sarah Birdsong. I was orphaned, yes. Raised by Cheyenne, yes. But I have worked in your town for 3 years. I have helped your sick, mended your clothes, and cared for your children when you would let me." She looked directly at several men in the mob. "Mr. Henderson, I held your wife's hand when she was dying because no one else would sit with her. Mr. Price, I saved your son from drowning in the river. Ask for nothing. Mr. Carlton, when your barn burned, I worked all night to help save your animals." Several men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "You call me curse, but only blessing I have given. You say I bring trouble, but trouble comes from your own hearts. Mr. Granger hired me not because I am Cheyenne or white or anything in between. He hired me because I work hard and honestly. This is America, yes? This is supposed to be freedom?" Father Miguel dismounted and walked to stand beside her. "The girl speaks truth. How many of you call yourselves Christians? Yet you come with torches to burn out a man who showed compassion?" Christ would weep. One by one, others joined them. Mrs. Chun, dignified despite her fear. Several of the Mexican vaqueros. Even Mr. Liu stepped forward, his broken English clear. "We are all different, but we are all people. Why must we fight? Why not build together?" The mob was dissolving. Men in the back were already turning away, unwilling to be part of what this had become. Others followed, shame or practicality overcoming their initial fervor. Judge Harrington's face was purple with rage. "You fools! You're letting them win." "Don't you see what I see?" Colonel Pritchard interrupted. "Is a federal judge inciting violence. One more word, Your Honor, and you'll be explaining yourself to the territorial governor." That was the final straw. Even the mayor backed away from Harrington, not willing to risk his political career. Within minutes, only the judge and a handful of diehards remained. "This isn't over, Granger," Harrington snarled. "You've chosen your side. You'll regret it." "I've been regretting things my whole life, Judge," Granger replied calmly. "This won't be one of them." As the last of the mob rode away, an extraordinary scene unfolded. Warriors, vaqueros, Chinese workers, cavalry soldiers, and ranch hands all mingled uncertainly. The immediate threat was over, but no one quite knew what came next. It was Sarah who broke the tension. She approached Standing Elk and spoke rapidly in Cheyenne, then turned to Father Miguel and did the same in Spanish. Both men smiled and nodded. "Mr. Granger," she said, "the warriors wish to share a meal before returning to their lands. Father Miguel says his men brought food. Perhaps we feast together? All of us?" Granger looked around at the unlikely assembly and made a decision that would be talked about for generations. "Mrs. Chun, it looks like we're having a party. Let's show these folks some double G hospitality." What followed was surreal. Tables were set up in the yard. Fires were built. Food appeared from wagons and saddlebags, traditional Cheyenne fry bread, Mexican tamales, Chinese dumplings, and American beef and beans. Warriors sat next to vaqueros. Cavalry soldiers shared drinks with Chinese workers, and over it all, the sound of multiple languages slowly giving way to laughter. Colonel Pritchard found himself in deep conversation with Standing Elk about tactics and honor. Father Miguel blessed the food in Latin, Spanish, and broken Cheyenne. Mrs. Chun and several Mexican women compared recipes while their children played together. Granger stood with Sarah at the edge of it all, watching the impossible become real. "You did this," he said quietly. "Your bridges held." "We all did this," she corrected. "Each kindness, each choice to see people not as strangers but as relatives. This is what the people taught me. We are all related." As the evening wore on, Standing Elk approached them. "The danger has passed. We return to our lands. But know this, Granger, you are now brother to the Cheyenne. Your name will be remembered." He handed Granger something, a carved piece of wood, intricate and beautiful. "Token of protection," Standing Elk explained. "Any Cheyenne who sees this will know you are a friend." Similar exchanges happened throughout the evening. Father Miguel promised that the Mexican community would support the ranch. Mr. Liu, through an interpreter, offered a business partnership. Colonel Pritchard quietly assured Granger that the fort would be watching for any retaliation. As the groups began to depart, each going their separate ways, but somehow closer than before. Sarah found herself overwhelmed with emotion. In trying to destroy her, the mob had instead created something beautiful, a moment when barriers fell and common humanity triumphed. Miss Birdsong. She turned to find Judge Harrington's wife standing there. The woman looked ashamed and nervous. I wanted to apologize for how the town has treated you, for how I treated you. She held out a small package. This was my mother's. I'd like you to have it. Sarah opened it carefully, finding a beautiful silver locket inside. I cannot, please. Let me do this one right thing. After Mrs. Harrington left, Sarah stood holding the locket, tears streaming down her face. Granger put a gentle hand on her shoulder. You all right? I never imagined ... double quote, she whispered. When you hired me, I thought only to work, to survive. I never imagined this. Neither did I, Granger admitted. But I'm glad it happened. Eleanor would have loved you, you know. My wife. She always said the world needed more bridge builders. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now? Now we get back to the business of ranching. But something tells me the Double G is going to be a different place from now on. A place where anyone willing to work hard and treat others with respect is welcome. As the last of the visitors departed and the ranch settled back into quiet, Sarah walked to the ridge where the warriors had kept their vigil. The fires were cold now, but she could still feel the power of what had happened there. She thought about the scared girl who'd arrived in Fort Laramie 3 years ago, speaking broken English and expecting only cruelty. That girl could never have imagined this night standing as a bridge between worlds, helping to forge something new from the collision of old prejudices and new possibilities. In her pocket, she felt the weight of Mrs. Harrington's locket. On her skin, she still wore the turquoise of her Cheyenne childhood. Both were part of her now, just as she was part of both worlds. The next morning brought a new day to the Double G Ranch. The burn damage to the barn needed repair. The regular work of the ranch continued, but something fundamental had changed. The ranch hands worked with a new pride, knowing they'd stood for something greater than just land and cattle. Mrs. Chun hummed as she cooked, planning meals that incorporated recipes she'd learned from her new Mexican friends. Even the horses seemed calmer, as if they too sensed the shift in the air. Granger found Sarah feeding the chickens, a task she'd taken on that first day and still enjoyed. Telegram came from town, he said. Judge Harrington has resigned. It seems the territorial governor heard about last night and wasn't pleased. The mayor's also facing pressure to be more inclusive in town policies. Change comes, Sarah said simply. Indeed it does. Speaking of which, I've been thinking. The ranch is doing well, and after last night, I expect we'll be doing more business with the fort and the Mexican ranches. I could use a proper foreman for household operations. Someone who understands different cultures can manage diverse workers. Interested? Sarah's eyes widened. Mr. Granger, you're just the woman who prevented a war last night, he interrupted. You're just the person everyone trusts. You're just exactly what this ranch needs. She stood straighter, the morning sun catching the silver locket at her throat. Then yes, I accept. And so it was that Sarah Birdsong, the wild girl mocked by the town, became the first woman foreman in Wyoming Territory. The Double G Ranch became known as a place where hard work mattered more than skin color, where former enemies could become allies, and where bridges built with kindness proved stronger than walls built with hate. The carved token standing elk had given Granger hung above the ranch's main gate, a symbol and a promise. Over the years, it would weather storms and sunshine, watching over a place where the impossible had become possible, where one act of simple decency had rippled outward to change the course of lives and history. But that morning, as Sarah went about her work with new purpose and Granger watched with satisfaction, it was simply a reminder of a night when warriors stood guard, when diverse people stood together, and when the power of human kindness proved mightier than the torch of hatred. The wild girl had found her home, and in finding it, she had helped others find theirs as well.